The armory at Camp Dominion always smelled of oil and metal. Every afternoon, soldiers filled the long rows of benches, cleaning their rifles, checking magazines, and preparing gear for the next mission. To General Robert Kane, the ritual was familiar. After 30 years of service, he had seen it in every outpost, from desert bases to mountain strongholds. Today's inspection was supposed to be routine, just another walk through the facility to ensure discipline and order were intact. General Kane moved slowly, his polished boots echoing against the concrete floor. His aide, Colonel Michael Harris, trailed behind him, tablet in hand, ready to log observations. Kane's sharp eyes swept the room. Most soldiers worked in pairs, chatting as they stripped weapons down into their components. The noise of brushes scraping metal mixed with bursts of laughter and clinking tools. But in the far corner, nearly hidden behind a rack of rifles, sat a lone figure. She wasn't talking, wasn't joking, and wasn't rushing. Instead, she was bent over a massive sniper rifle, carefully dismantling it piece by piece. The weapon looked more like a machine than a firearm, long, heavy, built for distances most shooters only dreamed of. Kane slowed, curiosity pulling him off his planned path. He stopped a few feet away, watching in silence. Sergeant Emma Torres didn't notice him at first. Her hands moved with steady precision, cleaning every part as though the rifle were a delicate instrument. The bolt carrier was set aside gently, the scope lenses wiped clean with reverence. Nothing about her movements was casual. They carried the weight of ritual, as if each pass of the cloth and each careful check mattered more than time itself. Harris leaned closer. "Barrett M82 variant," he murmured. "50 caliber. Heavy beast." Kane nodded but said nothing. What held his attention wasn't the rifle itself, but the quiet dedication of the woman maintaining it. Most soldiers treated cleaning as a task, necessary, but dull. Torres, however, gave the impression that she was conversing with the weapon, ensuring it would be ready for whatever came next. Finally, Emma looked up. She noticed the general, straightened slightly, and offered a crisp nod. "Sir, carry on," Kane replied, using the traditional phrase that meant she could return to her work. She dipped her head and did just that, as if his presence didn't disturb the ritual in the slightest. Kane was about to move on when something caught his eye. Pinned to her uniform, just above her heart, was a small badge. At first, it seemed unremarkable, another one of the many token soldiers collected during their careers. But when Kane leaned closer, his breath stalled. The badge read, 3,200-meter confirmed kill. He blinked, then blinked again. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. Colonel Harris tilted his head. "Sir," Kane pointed. That's not right. No one makes a shot at that distance. It can't be true." Emma's dark eyes flicked toward him, calm and steady. She didn't look offended, merely attentive. "Sir, the engagement was confirmed by multiple observers and recorded in Mission Command. The documentation exists, though it is classified." Her voice was even, factual, almost clinical. Kane studied her, feeling the weight of disbelief pressing against his experience. He had read every account of long-range engagements in military history. 2,000 meters was considered extraordinary. Anything beyond that belonged in rumor or speculation. But here was a young woman, not yet 30 by the look of her, calmly asserting a record-breaking kill more than 2 miles away. "Sergeant," he said slowly, "if that badge is genuine, it makes you the most precise shooter in the world." Emma merely nodded, then returned to sliding a freshly cleaned barrel back into place. Her hands moved with unhurried care. Kane exchanged a glance with Harris, who was already scrolling through the personnel database. "General, I can pull up her record." "Do it." Within moments, Harris began reading. Sergeant Emma Torres, graduate of Advanced Sniper School with top scores. Specialized courses in ballistics, environmental physics, reconnaissance. Attached to the 75th Rangers, later to Delta Force Operations. Multiple deployments. Several entries are marked classified. Kane felt a chill spread through him. He looked back at the quiet woman in the corner, who seemed utterly detached from the commotion her file and badge had stirred. She was not grandstanding, not even trying to prove her worth. She simply cleaned her rifle, waiting for the next mission, as though the general's astonishment was irrelevant. In that moment, Robert Kane realized he was staring at a soldier unlike any he had encountered. Not a braggart, not a loud legend, but someone whose very existence threatened to rewrite the limits of human capability. And she was right here, hidden in plain sight, polishing steel in the corner of an armory. The following afternoon, General Robert Kane returned to the armory, though inspections were not scheduled. Curiosity had drawn him back, and curiosity was not a trait he indulged often. Yet something about Sergeant Emma Torres gnawed at him, like a puzzle missing a single piece. The armory buzzed with the usual sounds of soldiers, cleaning rifles, and checking ammunition belts. Kane's eyes swept over the rows of men and women, but he moved almost unconsciously to the same corner where he had first seen her. And there she was, exactly as before, bent over her rifle with absolute concentration. Torres didn't look up as the general approached. Her hands moved with the same deliberate rhythm, every movement clean and exact. To an untrained eye it might have looked like tedious repetition, but Kane had handled enough weapons to recognize the level of detail she was attending to. Most soldiers, Kane began, his voice steady, treat this as a chore. You make it look like a ritual. Emma paused only long enough to give a small nod. Sir, this weapon is not just a tool. It is an extension of myself. If it fails, I fail. I won't allow that. Her words were calm, but Kane felt the conviction underneath. She lifted a lens cloth, polishing the glass of her scope until it gleamed. The act was done slowly, reverently, as though she were tending to something sacred. 3 hours? Kane asked, recalling what Colonel Harris had told him. Yes, sir. Every day. He raised a brow. That is excessive by most standards. Emma looked up for the first time. Her gaze wasn't defiant, only steady. Excessive maintenance never cost a soldier their life, General. Neglect has. The reply silenced Kane. For a moment, he saw not a young soldier, but the steel of a veteran who had lived too long in the shadow of failure's consequences. Emma returned to her work. Each part of the massive Barrett rifle was laid out in perfect order, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light. The weapon seemed less like cold machinery and more like a living creature, cared for, respected, prepared. Kane realized she wasn't simply cleaning. She was listening, testing springs for resistance, running her fingers along the barrel for imperfections, smelling for traces of oil or residue. You've made this rifle into something personal, Kane observed. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Sir, every rifle has a story. Most people don't care to hear it. I do. This one has kept me alive. It deserves respect. Kane folded his arms, studying her. Most soldiers decorated their lockers with photographs, trinkets, reminders of home. Emma Torres carried no such tokens. Her rifle was her memory, her anchor, her past. Tell me something, Kane said after a long silence. When you look at that weapon, do you see steel and powder, or do you see the lives it has taken? Her hands paused for just a heartbeat, then continued. Both, sir. Always both. A weapon without conscience is dangerous. A soldier without conscience is worse. The words were heavier than the rifle itself. Kane found himself unsettled, though he could not say why. Colonel Harris appeared at his side, tablet in hand. General, her records are unusual. She's attended schools that don't exist on paper. Ballistics programs, environmental warfare courses, attachments to units outside the chain we recognize. Kane glanced at Emma. She said nothing. You have an unusual service record, Sergeant, Kane said. Yes, sir. That's all you have to say. Emma looked up again, her face calm, unreadable. My work speaks for itself. Records are for others. Her tone wasn't arrogant, but Kane felt the weight of a soldier who had been shaped by missions no one else was allowed to read. The badge still lingered in his mind. 3,200 meters. You believe your preparation makes you different, Kane said. She set down the clean bolt assembly and met his eyes. Preparation doesn't make me different. It keeps me alive long enough for skill to matter. For the first time in years, Kane felt as though he were standing in the presence of something beyond his understanding. He had commanded elite units, work beside the most disciplined operators in the world. But this woman's quiet confidence carried a gravity he could not ignore. Around them, the noise of the armory faded into insignificance. Kane felt the room shrink until only the general, the sergeant, and the massive rifle existed. "You know," Kane said finally, "discipline like yours is rare, even among the best." Emma inclined her head. "Sir, discipline is the one advantage we control. Enemies may have numbers, technology, or luck, but discipline belongs to us." The words echoed like a doctrine. Kane realized this was not a lecture rehearsed from manuals. It was survival distilled into truth. "Sergeant Torres," Kane said slowly, "you intrigue me, and I don't say that lightly." Emma simply resumed cleaning her scope, as though the general's curiosity meant little to her. Kane stood silently for a long while, then finally turned away. As he walked toward the exit, Harris leaned closer. "Sir, what do you think of her?" Kane's eyes lingered once more on the figure in the corner. "I think," he murmured, "we may have stumbled across someone who redefines the limits of possibility." And for the first time in decades, the general felt the stirrings of awe. 2 days after his first encounter with Sergeant Emma Torres, General Robert Kane called her back into his office. The quiet efficiency of the armory had lingered in his mind, but what haunted him most was the tiny, unassuming badge pinned to her uniform. Kane sat behind his desk, a file spread before him. Colonel Michael Harris stood nearby, tablet glowing faintly as he scrolled through what little information was available. Classified redactions littered the record like scars. The knock came precisely at the scheduled hour. Emma entered with the same calm professionalism she carried everywhere. She saluted, then stood silently, her eyes steady, waiting. "At ease," Kane said, though his own tone carried more tension than usual. "Sergeant, I want to talk about that badge." Emma tilted her head slightly. "The confirmed kill recognition, sir?" "Yes," Kane replied, leaning forward. His finger tapped the word stamped into the photograph of her uniform. 3,200 meters confirmed. "Do you understand how implausible this looks?" Emma's expression didn't change. "Yes, sir. I've been told that many times." Kane leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "I've studied every documented sniper engagement in modern warfare. 2,000 meters, maybe 2,500 at the extreme. Beyond that, ballistics, wind, gravity itself, all work against the shooter. And yet here you sit, wearing a badge that says you achieved a kill over 2 miles away." Her voice remained even. The engagement was confirmed by observers and command staff. Data was recorded. The classification of the mission prevents disclosure of specifics, but the event occurred as documented. Colonel Harris shifted uncomfortably. He was a man of logistics and order, and even he struggled with the enormity of the claim. "General," he said softly, "the system lists her file as verified by multiple clearance levels. It's no clerical error." Kane's eyes narrowed. He wasn't a man who enjoyed being told something impossible was actually true. "Sergeant Torres, you must understand what this means. A 3,200-meter confirmed kill isn't just a personal achievement. It would be a military record unlike any in history." Emma's response came without hesitation. "Sir, with respect, records are not the purpose of war. Mission success is." The simplicity of her statement disarmed him more than any boast could have. She was not proud, not eager for recognition. If anything, she looked faintly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "Walk me through it," Kane said suddenly. "No mission details, just the technical reality. How does a human being make such a shot?" Emma hesitated, her gaze flicking briefly to Harris, then back to Kane. "Sir, do you want the simplified explanation or the complete truth?" "The truth," Kane said firmly. Emma set her shoulders. At that distance, a bullet doesn't just fly. It travels through shifting layers of air, each with its own wind speed, density, and temperature. Gravity pulls it down, the Earth's rotation nudges it sideways, and the slightest error in calculation magnifies into a miss measured in meters. Kane nodded slowly. "So how do you account for it all?" "Training, equipment, patience," Emma replied. "I use multiple range estimation techniques, laser, reticle, Manual triangulation. I monitor wind not just where I am, but at intervals along the trajectory, using observation of vegetation, dust, even thermal shimmer. Environmental sensors provide data, but interpretation is human. Then there's waiting. Hours, if necessary, until every factor aligns. One misjudged gust, one lapse in breath control, and the shot fails. Harris stared at her. You make it sound impossible. Emma looked at him calmly. It is improbable, Colonel. Not impossible. Kane leaned forward again. And yet you claim you did it. Her gaze never wavered. Yes, sir. For a long moment, the office was silent except for the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Kane felt the weight of disbelief, warring with the evidence in front of him. He had seen soldiers exaggerate their feats, boast of kills they had not made. But Emma Torres did not boast. She stated facts with the same steady tone she used when explaining her cleaning rituals. For hours, Emma added suddenly. Kane frowned. What? The preparation, she said. From initial observation to final trigger pull. 4 hours of calculation, observation, and adjustment. The shot itself took seconds, but the engagement was 4 hours long. Kane absorbed that. The patience alone was staggering. Most soldiers grew restless waiting 10 minutes. To lie motionless, exposed, focused for hours on one chance. That required not just discipline but a kind of devotion few could fathom. You do realize, Kane said slowly, that if what you claim is true, your skill represents something beyond conventional warfare, a capability with strategic implications. Emma inclined her head slightly. That is why my missions are classified, sir. Colonel Harris shifted again. General, if I may, she's not exaggerating. I've seen snippets of her record. Training modules I've never heard of. Units I didn't even know existed. If anyone could do it, he trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Kane's gaze remained fixed on Emma. He wanted to challenge her, to press until her calm facade cracked. Yet the longer he looked, the more he realized it would not crack. She wasn't defending herself. She was simply telling the truth as she knew it. Finally, Kane exhaled, shaking his head slowly. Sergeant Torres, I don't know whether to call you a soldier, a scientist, or a myth. But I do know one thing. I need to see this for myself. Emma's brow furrowed. Sir, I want a demonstration, Kane said. His voice carried the authority of command. Show me what's possible. Even if not 3,000 meters, show me something no ordinary soldier could replicate. For the first time, Emma hesitated. General, such demonstrations require clearance, range facilities, safety protocols. I'll handle the authorizations, Kane interrupted. His tone left no room for argument. You just tell me what you need. Emma met his eyes, then gave a single slow nod. Yes, sir. Kane leaned back in his chair, feeling both satisfied and unsettled. He had demanded proof, and soon he would see it. Yet deep inside, a quiet thought whispered, what if she truly was what she claimed? What if the impossible had already been achieved? The firing range at Camp Dominion stretched farther than most generals ever needed. At 1,200 meters, it was already longer than anything Kane had personally witnessed in decades of service. But if Sergeant Emma Torres was to be believed, this distance was not even half of what she had once achieved. General Robert Kane stood at the observation platform, with Colonel Michael Harris beside him, a cluster of officers and range staff waiting with anticipation. The day was clear, sunlight pouring over the flat expanse, wind flags fluttering faintly at measured intervals. It was perfect weather for a demonstration, and Kane had made certain every detail was prepared exactly as Torres had requested. Emma was already prone at the firing position, her rifle resting on its bipod, body aligned with the precision of a machine. Around her, assistants had placed monitoring equipment, wind sensors, barometers, laser rangefinders, and a small portable ballistic computer. Yet despite the array of technology, it was Torres herself who seemed to anchor the scene. General, she called out evenly, the target is placed at 1,200 meters. Conditions are favorable. I will now demonstrate standard long-range precision engagement. Kane nodded. Proceed. She began with a methodical process that seemed to stretch time itself. First, she adjusted the scope, dialing magnification to bring the distant silhouette into clarity. Then she measured the wind at her position, raising a small device that spun delicately before feeding data into her calculations. "What exactly is she doing?" one of the younger captains asked quietly. Harris answered without looking away. "She's mapping the battlefield in numbers. Every variable, wind, humidity, even the Earth's rotation, must be accounted for at this distance." Torres consulted her ballistic computer, fingers tapping lightly. But Kane noticed she didn't rely solely on the machine. Between each adjustment, her eyes scanned the terrain, reading the grass, the shimmer of heat rising from the ground, the flutter of distant flags. She was not merely processing data. She was interpreting the world. At last, she settled her cheek against the stock. Silence gripped the range. Even the officers stopped their whispers, sensing the gravity of the moment. Torres inhaled deeply, then exhaled with deliberate calm. Her fingers squeezed. The report of the Barrett thundered across the field, and the recoil pushed against her shoulder like a living force. The spotter, watching through a high-powered scope, called out almost instantly, "Target hit. Center mass." Kane lifted his binoculars. The distant target bore a hole within inches of dead center. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Emma was already preparing for a second shot. She recalculated wind, adjusted her hold, and fired again. Another echo, another confirmation. 3 shots, all clustered tightly near the heart of the target. "Impressive," Kane admitted at last. Emma lifted her head slightly. "Sir, this is only the foundation. The same principles extend to greater distances, but the challenges multiply." "Explain," Kane ordered. She sat back, folding her legs neatly, her voice carrying across the platform. "At 1,200 meters, bullet drop is already measured in dozens of feet. Wind drift can push the round several meters off course. To compensate, a shooter must not only know the present conditions, but predict what will happen over the bullet's flight time. At 3,000 meters, flight time exceeds 6 seconds. In that span, the world changes." Harris frowned. 6 seconds doesn't sound like much. Emma shook her head. "It is an eternity. Imagine throwing a stone and expecting it to land in a cup while gusts of wind shift unpredictably between you and the cup. Now imagine doing it blindfolded, guided only by data, instinct, and patience." Kane studied her intently. "So the impossible becomes possible through preparation." "Yes, sir," Emma replied. "Preparation and discipline. Hours of lying motionless, watching for subtle patterns, noticing how birds glide at a distance, how heat bends light, how dust swirls across the ground. Machines help, but the final judgment belongs to the shooter." One of the younger officers spoke up. "But even if you calculate everything perfectly, isn't there still chance?" "There is always chance," Emma said softly. "But discipline reduces its influence. Where others rely on luck, I rely on patience. Sometimes that means waiting until nature itself provides the alignment." Her words hung in the air, both poetic and brutal. Kane realized this was not the cold science of war manuals. This was artistry, learned through years of repetition until instinct and calculation fused into something greater. "Sergeant Torres," Kane said, "tell me about the 3,000-meter shot. Not the mission, just the science of it." Her gaze grew distant, as though replaying the moment in her mind. "Mountain terrain. The elevation gave me the advantage of thinner air, less drag. Weather was calm, visibility near perfect. The target remained stationary long enough for full computation. It was the kind of alignment that comes once in a career." Kane felt the hairs on his arms rise. There was no arrogance in her tone, only memory, heavy with consequence. "For hours," she added. "That's how long I lay in position before the shot. Muscles cramping, stomach empty, heart rate slowed. Every calculation repeated until doubt was gone. When the moment came, I wasn't thinking of records, only of not failing." The officers were silent. Kane looked around at them, noting the awe written on their faces. He understood it, because he felt the same. "Sergeant," he said at last, "you've made your point. What I witnessed today was beyond exceptional. I can only imagine what the full extent of your capability looks like. Emma nodded once, then began disassembling her rifle with the same calm ritual as always. To her, the demonstration was not glory. It was maintenance of truth, proof offered only because it had been demanded. As Kane watched her, he realized the truth. The science of the impossible shot was not just numbers, not just machines. It was the fusion of relentless discipline, unshakable patience, and a soldier's quiet will to succeed where failure meant lives lost. And it was embodied fully in the woman before him. Weeks passed after the demonstration at Camp Dominion, but the memory stayed etched into General Robert Kane's mind. He had seen countless displays of skill across his long career, from fighter pilots threading steel through clouds to special operators dismantling threats in seconds. Yet nothing compared to the quiet power of Sergeant Emma Torres lying prone behind her rifle, transforming physics into precision. Still, one question lingered. How many times had she done this in silence, with no one watching except those whose lives depended on her? Kane finally found an answer during a classified briefing in the dimly lit chamber beneath headquarters. Seated across from him was General Patricia Stone, head of operations few dared to even whisper about. She slid a folder across the table, its cover stamped with more layers of clearance than Kane had ever seen. You wanted to know the truth about Torres, Stone said evenly. Be careful what you wish for. Kane opened the file. The pages inside read less like a service record and more like fragments of legend. Missions in deserts, jungles, and mountains. Targets neutralized at ranges thought unworkable. Operations turned from certain disaster into success because of a single shot. The infamous 3,200-meter kill wasn't a rumor at all. It was one entry among dozens. He glanced up. Why keep this buried? Stone's gaze was steady. Because soldiers like Torres are not public assets. They're strategic tools. Advertise her capabilities, and enemies adapt. Keep her hidden, and she changes battles before they begin. Kane leaned back, feeling the weight of revelation. He had assumed Emma was an anomaly within the system. Now he realized she was the system, one of those rare individuals recruited, trained, and employed in ways most officers would never understand. What about her personally? Kane asked quietly. What does this kind of service do to a person? Stone's expression softened for a moment. It isolates them. She can't talk about her missions, can't share her triumphs, can't even admit the truth of her life outside classified walls. She carries it alone, cleaning her rifle in a corner while others joke and laugh. To most, she's invisible. To us, she's irreplaceable. Kane closed the file. The image of Emma bent over her rifle returned, not as a soldier obsessed with routine, but as someone preserving her sanity through ritual. A weapon was easier to care for than the memories of what it had done. 6 months later, Kane's understanding deepened. News arrived of a hostage crisis in a distant region, details sealed under heavy classification. The assault teams couldn't breach without risking the captives. The standoff stretched long enough that desperation whispered through command halls. Then came the message. Torres was deployed. Hours later, the hostages were freed. The threat eliminated by a shot so precise it seemed like myth reborn. Kane never saw official details. He only knew the crisis ended. Lives were saved, and Emma returned without fanfare, resuming her quiet place at the armory bench. One evening, Kane visited her there. The armory was nearly empty, shadows stretching long across the floor. Emma was, as always, with her rifle, methodically wiping down the barrel. Another mission? Kane asked. She didn't look up. Yes, sir. And success. Her hands paused briefly, then continued. Success is measured by those who return alive, sir. By that standard, yes. Kane studied her, the weight of secrecy pressing between them. He wanted to thank her, to acknowledge the scale of what she had done. But he also understood that recognition was not what kept her steady. Instead, he said softly, I've learned something from you, Sergeant. Emma raised her eyes, curious. That extraordinary skill often hides where no one looks. That discipline is louder than any medal, and that sometimes the quietest soldier in the room carries the heaviest burden. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. broken only by the faint rasp of cloth against steel. Finally, Emma inclined her head. "Sir, most of what we do will never be known. That's the nature of our work. But knowing it mattered, that's enough." Kane felt a rare heaviness in his chest. He had commanded armies, issued orders that shaped wars, but this woman's words struck deeper than any battlefield speech. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Torres," he said. "Sir, you prove something to me. That the edge of human possibility isn't marked by records or recognition. It's marked by people like you. People who prepare in silence for moments that decide everything." Emma offered no reply, just a faint nod before returning to her task. Kane stepped into the night air outside the armory, the desert wind brushing against his face. He realized then that the true strength of the military didn't always lie in its fleets or battalions. Sometimes it lay in a single figure, hidden in plain sight, who carried the power to change the outcome of history with one impossible shot. From that night on, whenever Kane inspected the armory, his eyes always drifted to the corner where Emma worked. And every time, he felt the same reminder, that legends do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they sit quietly, wiping down a rifle, waiting for the moment the world will need them again.